Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. President Donald Trump crossed the line this week, the one that divides questionable, even lawless conduct from raw autocracy. He fired his own hand-picked U.S. attorney because the attorney wouldn't prosecute cases against Trump enemies without evidence. He then installed a lackey with no experience, and against all advice from her office, she indicted former FBI head Jim Comey. The indictment was the most crass, unjust, and deplorable action this Department of Justice has taken, and it confirms that the rule of law is dead in the federal government and that Trump killed it. The rule of law took almost a severe hit when we learned that tough-talking immigration czar Tom Homan apparently accepted $50,000 in a bag in an FBI sting, but that the investigation was then closed by Emil Bove and other lawless Trump henchmen. One significant and heartening development leavened the grim news of the week. Disney, which had genuflected to Trump by yanking Jimmy Kimmel off the air, relented and reinstalled him after a matter of days. The ultimate cause of the reinstatement seems to have been popular will and protest, the very sort of force that may well be the prime tool in the multi-year fight against Trump's tyranny. To unpack a week when Trump's raw partisan approach to criminal justice, law and facts be damned, was on full display, I'm very happy to welcome three of the most knowledgeable commentators in the country. They've all got extensive experience in the ways of DOJ and federal criminal justice, and they also are all Talking Feds stalwarts. And they are Jonathan Alter, an award-winning author, filmmaker, columnist, and MSNBC political analyst. Our Talking Feds fact checkers have confirmed each of those professions. And if that's not enough, he's written books about FDR, Obama, Jimmy Carter, and most recently, the felony trial of Donald Trump, which we attended together. Oh, and he's got a really great Substack called Old Goats. Jonathan, so happy to see you here. Thanks for joining.
Good to be here, Harry.
Paul Fishman. He had a decades-long career in the Department of Justice where he served in capacities ranging from line prosecutor to U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey, and to, I want to add here, because it's in some ways the most powerful or important role in the department, the one that Emil Bove recently had, Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, the PADAG. We may talk about that more. He now heads Arnold Porter's crisis management and strategic response team, in addition to his other top roles at the firm, and is quite involved in a lot of important litigation growing out of Trump's various overreaches. Paul, thanks so much for joining.
Harry, it's always great to be on your show.
And Mimi Rocah, another killer line prosecutor, but supervisor, who's going to be able to speak to some of what's happened this week. She was a federal prosecutor for the vaunted Southern District of New York for over 16 years. And then from 2021 until this past year, she was the elected district attorney of Westchester County. She's now an adjunct professor at Fordham University's law school and a top legal commentator. Mimi Rocah, thanks so much for joining.
Great to be back with you, Harry.
What a week. Let's start with the Comey indictment. My feeling is that a lot of people are seeing it as just one affront among many, where at least I, as a former prosecutor, and maybe others here, are seeing it as like a third rail, break, glass, alarm moment. What's your view about just how serious, grave, important a moment is?
Well, look, in one sense, this is totally foreseeable, right? Donald Trump has been telegraphing since he started running for the second term, that this is what he intended to do, that he felt aggrieved by the fact that he was investigated and impeached and investigated and indicted and indicted. And all of that makes the way he thinks makes him feel like he's entitled for retribution. He calls it justice, but he's entitled to retribution. And he's looking for anybody he can to go after. And Jim Comey is just the first guy, in my view. I represent Congresswoman LaMonica McIver. I think she was before him. But Comey's different because he came into office saying he wanted Comey to go down, and he has done everything he can now to make that happen.
And he sees Comey as one of his antagonists. So it really is reprisal in a way MacGyver isn't.
Well, it's also, I may be overanalyzing this, but I am married to a psychoanalyst. He had Comey as his director of the FBI. So for the way Donald Trump thinks, if thinking is the right word, it is an extraordinary betrayal for him by somebody who he thought would actually have his back. And of course, didn't, because that's not Jim Comey's job. It's not the way he sees the world. It's not the kind of lawyer he is.
But Paul, you said Trump said this is what he was going to do, that it's not a surprise. And that's correct. Although the one tweak I would make to that statement is he said it's what he wanted to be done. He said that since day one. He actually, back in 2016, in a less direct way, said it about Hillary, lock her up, right? I mean, he's been calling for the investigation, prosecution, jailing of his perceived political enemies or just enemies or people who have betrayed him or whatever forever. One of the reasons this is such a Rubicon, cross the reddest line, et cetera, is because he was able to accomplish that for the first time, right? I think there are many different layers to why that is, but we should have been shocked, and many of us were, right? Like many of us have been screaming since 2015, 2016, you can't have the president saying, prosecute this person, prosecute that person. It's dangerous for the president to interfere in this case, that case, this case. Why? Well, the why is here now, because now he has actually achieved the criminal indictment of someone who should not have been indicted. And how do we know that? Because under legitimate analysis and reasons by real prosecutors, career prosecutors who were looking at it through the lens that all of us were taught to look at it through, not political, but based on the evidence and the law and discretion, they said no.
Right.
That's the one, sort of big difference here.
I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said, and I didn't mean to suggest that this is an extraordinary watershed moment in American history, and instead of making America great again, he's making it another country entirely, right? That's a thing. But I do think one thing we may need to keep in mind a little bit is that in the first administration, Don McGahn, who was then White House counsel, wrote him a memo saying, you can't do this shit, right? McGahn's gone. There's nobody there who's going to stop him now. And the Republican Party, nobody in the Republican Party, nobody in the Senate, nobody in the House, at least in the last 24 hours, has raised his or her hand and say, this is too far even for us. And so all of those restraints on his impulses are gone. He would have done this, I think, in the first term if he could have figured out how to do it. He's now figured out how to do it.
Right. There's no lawyer guardrails anymore telling him you can't. Well,
correct.
Although there's none in his inner circle, because there are. I mean, the U.S. attorney from Virginia, Eastern District, Virginia, did say so. And he is a Trump. He's not some deep state, U.S. attorney. He was the person Trump had picked and was going to be on his way to being the permanent U.S. attorney or, for the next 4 years, but for this whole incident. But yes, there's no one in his inner circle. And if there is, because there are hints that Todd Blanche, Pam Bondi said maybe no, Trump doesn't listen to them anymore. Why? Because there doesn't seem to be any consequences when he doesn't.
Right.
I agree that it's a break the glass moment, but the glass might be all over the floor. There's nobody to pick it up until Trump leaves office. But I don't think it's a crossing the Rubicon moment, because that suggests that the die is cast forever. And I'm thinking about this a lot because I'm writing a political biography of Julius Caesar right now.
Don't mess on Rubicon with him.
Hey, John, you and I are old enough to have gone to high school with Julius Caesar.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fortunately, I don't have to interview anybody for the book.
Right.
So even Caesar could have reversed course and not started the civil war in ancient Rome. And this also is not irreversible for all of the things that we have been hearing. And the reason I say that is because I'm old enough to have experienced the Nixon administration. Nixon was facing impeachment and had to resign from office for doing almost precisely what Trump just did. Let's not make any mistake of this. What Trump did was criminal. What Comey did was not criminal. And on the latter point, I would refer people to Andrew McCarthy, the very conservative pro-Trump legal analyst on Fox, has had the integrity to say Jim Comey was not lying to Ted Cruz on September 30th, 2020, when he said that he did not authorize a leak. What actually happened, and the Republicans investigating this have confirmed this, is that when Andrew McCabe told Comey that he had leaked, Comey said, okay, but that's not authorizing the leak. That's not originating the leak. And so McCarthy points out that, this just means there's simply no way on the evidence to convict. And the length of the indictment is only, a page and a half long. It's being brought by a person who has literally zero experience as a prosecutor. She's an insurance lawyer. My point is that this is reversible in the same way that Richard Nixon's corruption of the Justice Department, when he was ordering up all sorts of things and, confessing to it on the White House tapes. Nowadays, Trump just posted on Truth Social. When Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter came in, they reestablished the independence of the deeply corrupted Department of Justice that they inherited. So I just say this because if we can just get through the midterms and give the House of Representatives the power to subpoena all of these jokers on Capitol Hill, grill them, and then impeach Trump again, yes, this must happen. I know people go, oh, he's already been impeached twice. What's the point? No, this must happen in 2027. And then we'll have a trial in the Senate, which Trump will survive. But all of the evidence of the crime that Donald Trump just committed will be laid out for public inspection. And so that's the solace that I get from this, that starting in 2027, we're going to have some accountability for this criminal action on the part of the president. And then in 2029, when with any luck and the grace of God, we have a Democratic president, we'll be able to do what Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter did and reestablish the integrity of the Department of Justice.
I don't want to get too far afield from talking about the indictment, but what is the crime that you think Trump has? I mean, I obviously am completely and unabashedly critical of everything he has done with respect to DOJ and this in particular, but what is the crime that you see here?
You mean impeachable offense more than crime, right?
Oh, okay.
Well, abuse of power, but I mean, you guys are the lawyers. So if you fire a U.S. attorney, you in some ways could be obstructing justice, right? If you're doing that for crass political reasons, you're obstructing the advancement of justice here, as the judge will soon rule. The Trump people are going to say, well, it's a Biden appointed judge. But this thing's going to get thrown out. I mean, every lawyer in the United States knows that it's not a case. They have no evidence and no case. So once a judge throws that out, this is my question for you as the lawyers, and says that bringing this case was a horrible abuse of justice. Does that abuse of justice in the bringing of this case and this indictment, can that be interpreted, and is there any precedent for that being obstructing justice?
I don't think so, to be honest.
I have a way that I want to move to that. And let me just first, put my view on the record as a prosecutor, and I'm of the break glass 5-alarm fire. A fucking prosecution ordered by the president against a political enemy in the absence of proof, other than, kidnapping someone in the middle of the night and taking them to Gitmo or whatever. it gets no worse than that for me. And I feel a responsibility almost as a prosecutor to try to explain why it is so grave, so fundamental, so against everything we were learned. But that's just to throw my vote in and say this is even more serious.
So the question of whether Trump's conduct is criminal is strangely irrelevant right now because the Supreme Court has ruled that he can't be prosecuted for anything he does as president. And, they actually said in their opinion in the horrible immunity case where immunity bred impunity, that the only remedy was impeachment, right? And for impeachment, the high crimes and misdemeanors and abuse of power that have often been part of counts of impeachment, this fits into that very, very easily. There's no question that what he did is a high crime and misdemeanor by the standards of the Congress.
Yeah, I concur. And we've learned over the last several years how loosey-goosey the whole idea of it is. But again, it's just so rank and corrupt. It doesn't matter whether it fits the federal code. I want to go back to the point you made, Mimi. We have a memo from the career professionals the day before saying you don't have a case here, which to me really goes to what's so raw and rank about this. My question to you is this. Does that fact of the memo and her staff saying you don't have a case here, will it impact the case as it develops, or is it just now that the grand jury has acted a kind of, buried fact?
Oh, I absolutely think it does, right? And it's a hard point to deal with, but a really important one, this idea that, well, the grand jury indicted him. So, you're going to, I'm sure, have already heard that from many Trump supporters who will argue this is okay no matter what. And they'll say, Trump didn't indict him, the grand jury did. But here's, first of all, why it remains very relevant. As you know, there's going to be motion practice. And so before we even get to is there a valid claim here? I don't think so, but let's not even get to the merits of it. And, what's a judge going to do with the merits of the indictment? What's a jury going to do, et cetera? I think there's at least a good chance, whereas I wouldn't say this on almost any other circumstance, of a meritorious, both vindictive prosecution claim and or an outrageous government conduct claim. And those are both really, really hard motions for defense attorneys to prevail on, but we've also never had, as we've all been discussing, whether it's across the Rubicon or not, we can all agree that we have never, ever seen this set of facts before. We have never seen the head of the government, the president of the United States, calling for the prosecution and saying, I don't care what he's guilty of. He's guilty of something. He's guilty of being my enemy. And then the career prosecutors saying, no, that there isn't an actual meritorious case here to charge. We don't think we should. And then that being overruled by the political loyalist installed by the president. So I'm not going to say he's going to win, but if you're his lawyer, which he has a great lawyer, as we all know now, Pat Fitzgerald, you're going to make those arguments. And this all becomes very relevant. And maybe Siebert, the U.S. attorney, maybe he even gets called to testify to in front of the judge, maybe in camera, maybe, it may be not public.
Paul, I know you're about to talk. I just want to add to your load because you've represented a lot of high-profile defendants. Comey in his statement seemed to say, let's go, let's have a trial, let's do quick, they won't be ready. Obviously, as Mimi says, there's a real possibility for some very powerful motions practice here. What's the best way for Pat Fitzgerald to handle it?
Well, look, it's tricky for a lot of reasons. First of all, they're in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is known as the Rocket Docket. The cases get tried faster there, sooner there after indictment than anywhere else in the country, pretty much. And so if Jim Comey wants a trial quickly, and yesterday on his video posting, he said, basically, bring it on.
We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial.
If he wants to go to trial in maybe not in October, but in November, he's going to get that, is my guess. That's first. The interesting thing, though, is that he does, I think Mimi's exactly, he has a really good vindictive prosecution motion, right? And I mean, selective, I think, is trickier because you have to have people you got to compare them to. But for vindictive prosecution, we have both motions in the MacIver case.
You got
For a
both
vindictive
here.
prosecution motion, the first prong is there actual vindictiveness? Like the evidence of that is off the charts. Right? The president is clearly doing that. And I mean, along the way, he's turned the Eastern District of Virginia U.S. Attorney's Office into like an episode of The Apprentice. I don't like you, you're fired. I'll put somebody else in. It's completely insane and way beyond anything we've ever seen. And then he has to show that basically they're coming after Comey for, basically for his exercise of a statutory or constitutional right. He's being pursued because of his job as the head of the FBI, right? And so all of that makes this, I think, a better motion than many. The problem is that as a defense lawyer, you're thinking, I got to make the motions because I have to do everything I can to make the odds high that my client doesn't get convicted, right? And so if I have a good pretrial motion, particularly one that might, as Mimi pointed out a few minutes ago, result in some interesting and complicated and helpful discovery, because maybe the judge is going to take testimony about this. Maybe there'll be some effort to peek behind the curtain and see documents that the U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't otherwise be obliged to disclose. There are a lot of reasons to make that motion. On the other hand, I've had clients, other people have had clients who said basically, look, I want to go to trial. I want to go to trial quickly. I want to be vindicated. And if this case gets dismissed by a judge, I'm really not getting exonerated in the way I want to get exonerated. And honestly, I known Jim Comey a long time. I've known Pat a long time. They're both friends, but not incredibly close friends. So I don't pretend to know how they will analyze this. But those are the things that they have to be thinking about. What we also will learn, by the way, which we don't yet know, is exactly which statements. We're all speculating about it. We can all guess.
Right. Great
which
point.
Statements,
Explain. Yeah.
So the underlying facts here are really tricky.
When will we learn that, Paul?
We can learn it in one of two ways. We can learn it if the defense files a motion for what's called a bill of particulars, which is basically the indictment isn't specific enough. In a perjury case or an obstruction of justice case where particular statements are alleged, they're entitled to know exactly what question was asked and what answer I gave that you think prosecutor is underlies this offense. If you file what's called a motion for bill of particulars, and the government basically has to amend the indictment effectively with another filing in federal court, what often happens is the defense writes a letter to the U.S. Attorney's Office. This is, dear U.S. Attorney, I don't really get what's here. I don't want to have to make a motion for a bill of particulars. Please send it to me so I can defend myself. If it's the bill of particulars, we'll see it on the docket. If it's not, then we might not learn about it right away until they repeat it in their pretrial motions. But sooner or later, we'll learn what the actual theory of obstruction and false statement is in those two counts.
Let's posit. A lot of people think it's quite likely the case unwinds, the U.S. loses, maybe even at the motion stage. Does Trump manage somehow to declare victory and go on to the next one? Or is it the sort of humiliation, as much as he's put his chips on this, that plays as a big loss and hurts him politically?
This is such a fascinating question. So he cannot be humiliated. That just is not anything that will ever happen because he has no sense of shame.
It's not an emotion that he experiences, I think, John.
So humiliation is impossible in his case. But he can be dissuaded by his transactional nature into backing off. And the idea that he never backs off is just wrong. I mean, I know from personal experience in 1990, he threatened to sue me over something that I said about him in a documentary. And I took it to the Newsweek lawyer and she just laughed and said, join the club. There's hundreds of people like you all over New York. And he threatens things. In this case, he went further than threats. And then he often moves on to find another victim. But this is why what happened in the Jimmy Kimmel case, what's happened with some law firms and possibly with Harvard University, which is pushback, resistance, standing up to Trump. This works Democrats have gotten so defeatist and fatalistic about Trump. And this is why this crossing the Rubicon thing sticks in my craw. He does back off when the political price is high enough. If this goes badly for him, and in the court of public opinion, people are responding badly to this, he's got enough other problems that, he might decide, no, going after Hillary Clinton or whoever he's thinking of next isn't really going to work out for me. And so I'll go off and worry about my tariffs. A lot of it is just convincing him to go pick on somebody else. And the best way to do that is to resist. There are a lot of people, including some law firms and universities, who think that the best way to get him to go pick on somebody else is to duck and to give him what he wants. And that's exactly the wrong way to get him to move on and attack somebody else. The right way is pushback, resistance with everything that the forces for democracy have at their disposal.
John, I think it's a really great point, but I think it's worth also thinking about the fact that he didn't walk away from the law firm gambit until he lost 3 or 4 times. Right. He went after Perkins Coie, got shot down immediately. Then he went after Covington actually he started with Covington, Wilmer and Jenner. And only after he was like 0 for 3 in the courts did the process abate. You may be right that if he loses the Comey thing, then he backs away, but it may not be soon enough for Adam Schiff or Tish James or Lisa Cook.
I agree.
And that's the danger.
And George Soros.
George Soros.
So he's
exactly.
going to,
yes.
The craziest thing is this guy who is the king of extortionists, running the biggest extortion racket in the history of the world, is going after George Soros on a RICO charge. And they're very likely going to indict, if not Soros, somebody from the Soros Foundation.
Or it might be civil.
Or the foundation itself.
Yeah, the foundation itself.
I'll weigh in here also and just say part of the reason I'm so emphatic on my break glass moment is I do think there's a feeling that, that this is a kind of issue that is of burning interest to lawyers or others. And I think there is a strong possibility that the whole thing unwinds in completely humiliating fashion. But it's, forgotten within a week or two that it's more the lawyers who are all over this.
Yeah, Epstein is the only thing that sticks, Harry.
Yeah.
Nothing else sticks. Epstein is the whole, politically, is the whole ball game in terms of really tarring Trump. And this is for lawyers, but it's really important. Did you see what Alan Greenspan and these other people who've been on the Lisa Cook case, right? It's really important for elites to weigh in on this. So my question is, where is the American Bar Association? Where is the legal establishment mobilizing, not just having some liberals on MSNBC complaining about it?
Well, the American Bar Association has, they're clunky at it, but they've gone farther in this Trump administration than they ever gone before. They've been more proactive, putting out more statements, trying all sorts of, reaffirm your oath to lawyers, reminding lawyers about their oath, things like that. So I just want to give some credit to the ABA. It's not perfect, and they always definitely could have done more. But I think actually, and this gets to the, does this stay alive? Part of why the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing had a turnaround was because it wasn't just liberals on MSNBC. It was Ted Cruz. It was some conservative voices saying, okay, this is a bridge too far. And that is we have not seen that nearly at all, but certainly not enough in this Trump administration on anything. And the 2 places that we get little hints of it, one was with the Adams prosecution. When they did that, you did see criticism, again, from the Andrew McCarthys and Alan Dershowitz, who I am no fan of and have no respect for. But he did come out and say he didn't say this was wrong. He said what Danielle Sassoon did in resigning was right. And there was a lot of praise from all around, from the Wall Street Journal opinion pages, National Review, et cetera, of how the prosecutors reacted. And I think you're starting to see that a little bit here. We need more of it. But seems to me, and maybe it does come down to politically, then it is an issue. But if Trump reacts to anything, or at least the people around him get more persuasive, is when they can see that it isn't just, the radical left, crazy liberal Democrat Party criticizing, but some other people. And so we need those former Republican, those are the people, U.S. attorneys, AGs, presidents. No one can look at this who has a rational brain and knows anything about democracy and justice and think this is okay. They need to say it out loud. And so who can mobilize them? That's my question.
And I think they will. Let me just say briefly, John, the legal profession will be there. It's been less than 24 hours. There's all kinds of amicus briefs being ginned up. Plus, as Mimi says, as revelations come out, you're going to see a very robust law profession response.
To meld Mimi's point and John's point together, it has to be people who abandon ship who he actually gives a shit about, right? So, for example, on the Jimmy Kimmel thing, it was Ted Cruz and Joe Rogan, right, who said this will not stand. On the Epstein stuff, it's people in the House, at least a handful of Republican Congress members of the House who are outraged by the Epstein thing, right? It's not the mainstream former U.S. attorneys or former judges who were, Trump would call them the rhino U.S. attorneys or the Bush folks. It's got to be people who actually either he listens to or who get under his skin. And the question is, in this situation with Jim Comey, who are those people?
By the way, one of them is Jim Comey. He handles them beautifully, don't you find? He's really, nuanced and elegant.
What do you think about mass resignations? Because, I was struck, not only was this indictment just pathetic, even a layman could tell that it was pathetic, but in another filing, Lindsay, what's her face, she's trying to say that she's standing on principle, on our principles, and she spells it PRINCIPALS.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe she was referring to the president as her principal, John. Maybe that's what she meant.
That thought occurred to me. But another thought that occurred to me is that, a cacocracy is not just government of the corrupt. It's government of the corrupt and the stupid, right? So if you have mass resignations from the public integrity units of U.S. attorneys all over the country, they're going to have insurance lawyers, Alina Habba type lawyers, who don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. And they're going to have a lot harder time bringing these cases against Adam Schiff and the rest of them if they have nobody with any experience working at DOJ. So my question for you is, can you encourage these mass resignations without, say, hurting the counterterrorism functions of DOJ and the other things where we really do need the career people? Would a mass resignation from public integrity units help?
The problem is they've already decimated the public integrity units, so there's no one left to resign.
And EDVA itself, who the hell is going to try this case?
Well, so first of all, I don't know the actual numbers, but I heard a statistic that there are like 90 vacancies in the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. There are probably 25 or 30 lawyers down in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. So what does that mean? So first of all, I don't think the Trump world gives a rat's ass if people resign en masse. They just don't care. I think the way to take them to task here is, it's one thing, and it's terrible. I don't mean to undermine the horribleness of this, that Lindsay Halligan is in charge of the prosecution of Jim Comey. I mean, that's sort of crazy. But Lindsay Halligan is also now supervising all of the terrorism investigations in the Eastern District of Virginia. That's a frightening thought, right? She's supervising all of the organized crime and violent crime cases in the Eastern District of Virginia, and she knows nothing about how to do that. In DC, I understand they've arrested so many people, with this sweep of low-level crime, that the folks in the U.S. Attorney's Office don't have the bandwidth to do the bigger violent crime cases. That are what federal prosecutors should be focused on, right? And so the irony, John, is in some sense what you're suggesting is that the administration is actually not serious about cracking down on crime because they fired a
Right.
ton of people who actually know how to do that. They may be able to hire good people who think that they still want to be an assistant U.S. attorney, as Harry and Mimi and I did back when we were kids and you were a cub reporter, right? But lots of people are not applying for those jobs anymore, and they're going to end up hiring people to do those jobs who may be less qualified, and they're certainly not going to have supervisors around like Danielle Sassoon or like Siebert to train those people how to do the job right. And I think over the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see a raft of cases in federal court in which the judges are going to go, "Are you kidding me? This case doesn't work this way. This is not how the system is supposed to work."
You're the Department of Justice? Yeah. And they're already doing it. And I just say this to Halligan. It's not as if it's people are familiar with having a figurehead in the office who doesn't really know. She's different because she's come in as the enemy, as the embodiment of going this direction that's completely opposed to where the career professionals are. Okay, I am employing moderator's prerogative because we got to get to Homan. We learned this week that there's some pretty good indication that he took $50,000 in cash in a kava bag in an FBI undercover investigation, although the White House spokesperson said, "Nah, he never did it, didn't do anything wrong." Here's my main question, because I wrote about it this week. Do you see any way in the world in which the claim that I think they're going towards, which is we closed it down because we thought the Supreme Court would make trouble on the bribery thing because he hadn't yet been selected? I'll just put it right out there. My claim was no friggin' way. That something like that would have taken months and months, involve OLC. By the way, with this big kind of fish, there's many other crimes to think about, much more investigations to do. The prospect that they actually shut it down in a regular, meritorious way, how do you evaluate that? Is that clearly a lie? Was the shutting down just plainly political, or is it more nuanced than that?
Well, I mean, couple of things. First of all, they said that it was for political reasons. They said this was a politically motivated prosecution. And again, we need to use their words when they are, frankly, not smart enough to know. I mean, they did the same thing in Adams when they said, this isn't about the merits. This is about, immigration and blah, blah. So they said that out loud. And so that is a political reason. If you're shutting it down because it's not based on the merits. As to that argument, it wouldn't be wrong that bribery prosecutions are incredibly challenging now, but it's not like nobody's ever been prosecuted for bribery. And in fact, I mean, usually people say, well, bribery, it's not, it's not like you're ever going to have people taking a bag of cash, right? And so usually the part about what is the elected official getting is not so obvious. Here it's so obvious. I mean, literally did the thing that we all joke about that you never have. He took the bag of cash.
Yeah. And by the way, Mimi, have you ever heard of a sting where they let him walk out with the cash?
No.
As far as I can tell, he kept the fucking cash.
I know. Where's the cash? I want the cash.
Can you
back.
imagine?
Well, so they must have thought it was going to continue, right?
Yeah, right.
But also, the reporting at least is that he wasn't targeted. They came about him because some other subject or witness kept mentioning him, which is how investigations naturally go. I think the legal issue here would have been, was he yet a public official? Does he qualify under that because it was, I think, announced? I mean, that's very fact specific. But there's no way you just throw up your hands and say, yeah, this is too hard. You investigate, you research the law, and
money laundering, tax claims.
That's what I was going to say. And by the way, there's plenty of other crimes, like tax in particular. See how is he going to list that $50,000? That's probably part of why they let him walk away with it. Is he going to put that on his tax returns? And those are, bread and butter kind of crimes.
The fact that they let him walk away with the cash suggests A, what Mimi just said, which is maybe that investigation was continuing. But B, maybe there was other stuff going on too with the same informant. And if they had arrested him with the money, they didn't have enough yet to do it, and they might have blown whatever other investigation, the undercover FBI agent or whoever, whether it's an informant, right? There may have been a plot to with other folks. So we don't really know the answer to that question. And Mimi's right. There are problems with cases in which the person who takes the bribe is not yet a public official. But state law bribery doesn't require that. Commercial bribery, I can't remember where the transaction,
Texas.
which oh yeah, well, there's no chance that a state prosecutor in Texas is going to go after Homan, right? That's probably
right.
But here's how far we've jumped the shark, right? Take us back 10 years ago. Take us back 5 years ago. Somebody's going to be in Joe Biden's administration. Somebody's even going to be in maybe even in Donald Trump's first administration. And the administration learns that sometime in the fall before the election, the person they want to make the border czar or the secretary of the Treasury or something else was in the parking lot of a Cava or some other, it doesn't have to be a Cava, it doesn't have to be a restaurant. And in the parking lot, takes a bag of $50,000 in cash. That would have been a disqualifier for most people, for most jobs, in most circumstances, in the public or private sector, until last week, right? So we have gone so far down the road that the administration can actually say, we don't give a shit why he took the money. Oh, and by the way, their new thing, as of 3 days ago, is he didn't take the money.
Can you believe
that's
it?
Going to be crazy
Just flat out, yeah.
Because that videotape is going to leak,
right?
If it hasn't already, of Homan skulking in the parking lot with the cash. But really, the idea that we just don't even care about that anymore in the way people are assigned to federal functions to exercise their responsibilities in situations that require them to be upstanding public servants imbued with integrity.
I think we can assume the tape's going to come out. Man, it's going to be lurid. I think we can also assume that they won't prosecute him and Texas doesn't. If that's the state of play at the end of the day here, what's the impact? Does this stick to Trump? Is it serious, or is it just one more $50,000 in a Cava bag between friends?
I'm from Chicago.
Right.
Even at the worst of the corruption in Chicago, if it involved cash, there was a problem because people have not been using cash, for anything except illegitimate purposes for a very long time. We're now going on 50 or 60 years where the word cash equals something very bad that just happened, right? And so in any other situation, locally, much less nationally, this person would have to resign. So it's a sign of, how much we're in la la land here, that this guy Homan still has his job. Now, will any of this rub off on Trump? Absolutely not. Nothing does, again, except Epstein. And tariffs, and, they're having premiums sharply raised on 22 million people and eliminating 4 or 5 million people from having health insurance altogether. I mean, these are the kinds of things that can hurt Trump. These, scandals we've learned from long experience do not. Now, the videotape, however, since everything today is about video, if that comes out, that could create bipartisan pressure on Homan to resign. And I think at that point, they would sort of, throw away these entrapment arguments that they're making and just make Homan a scapegoat for the criticism of ICE that is now developing all over the country. And just say, all right, they had to suspend or fire an ICE agent who was caught on videotape shoving in a really harsh way a woman when they were making arrests. So I could see a situation where Homan's real problem is not that he took $50,000 in cash, but that he's making the Trump administration look bad on immigration. And so we'll turn him into a human sacrifice.
You can have all the Chicago pride you want, John. You now live in New Jersey in the same town where I did. And we had Bob Menendez with cash and gold bars in his closet. So let's just that era is not quite dead yet.
And where is he now?
Yeah, exactly.
He's in prison.
Of course.
So
yeah.
Right. This is like a bet on the Bears-Giants game.
I want to build on the point that you all are saying in this sense, that the like how far we've come that nobody's even just talking, forget criminal, right? Like this is just crazy bad conduct. And even the entrapment argument, like, okay, let's for discussion purposes say, you know, the FBI really tried to get him to take it. Would you guys take it? Would most law-abiding citizens out there take a bag of $50,000,
Right.
you know, because somebody offers it to them and they think maybe, you know, it's not normal behavior. And the reason I think that's important, and I don't know, maybe there's a Democrat out there doing that. This is not prosecutorial, so this is not exactly my lane, but like, why don't they make a bigger deal out of the fact that you can be in full agreement that people who are here not legally, who commit actual crimes, real crimes, should not be here anymore. Okay. You know, lots of people, I think, feel that way. But we all know that is not what they are doing. They are deporting law-abiding citizens who happen to be here illegally in a very, very aggressive way. Not a one-off, not just caught up in a sweep, but targeting them and ruining, and what Jonathan referred to, that was this horrible thing that we saw in a very violent way. And yet the person in charge of that, who's leading that charge, is a guy who's greedy enough to take $50,000. Get the outrage about who this person is and what a hypocrite he is, that he engaged in this conduct, whether it's a crime or not. This guy is profiting off deporting people no matter what they're doing. He's now richer than you or he made more money than you did in one day. Like, why aren't the Democrats banging that train? You know, that seems like a worthy political talking point that's real.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, the effort now is to try to get the tape. But if and when they do, 50,000 in a bag. All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we dig up the dirt on the agave plant to find out the difference between tequila and mezcal. So first things first, tequila is a type of mezcal, much like bourbon is a type of whiskey. In general, tequilas are mezcals, but not all mezcals are tequilas. Allow me to explain. Tequila can only come from the blue agave plant in specific regions of Mexico, like the region of Jalisco, where the city of Tequila is located. No coincidence there. Mezcal, however, can be made from many varieties of agave, specifically from the heart of the agave, known as the piña. The distillery process for tequila and mezcal is also different. Tequila is produced by steaming the blue agave and then distilling it in copper stills for a toasty, clean taste. On the other hand, mezcal, which appropriately means oven-cooked agave, is cooked in earthen pits with wood and charcoal before being distilled in clay pots. No wonder mezcal, which is typically consumed straight, has more of a smoky, earthy taste. Of course, the best way to get to know the differences between tequila and mezcal is to pick up a bottle of each from your Total Wine & More and pour hundreds of years of tradition right into your glass. Cheers!
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine & More for today's A Spirited Debate. Man, it's weeks like this and guests like you that make me want to go 2 hours. We can't, but I really want to at least touch on the Kimmel thing and just serve up to each of you for your view. Pretty big victory. I mean, it seemed like the popular resistance is what pushed it back as against Trump's wanting to pull him off. Just give me your bottom line quick take on the Kimmel return to the air.
So I was actually really surprised that he figured out how to come back. And I think there's a lot we don't know. Like Michael Eisner weighed in on this. He went public and he said that this was terrible. And Bob Iger is like one of Michael Eisner's proteges, right? And so suddenly Bob Iger he's looking at huge reputational damage for himself. Mm-hmm. And then the other factor that I think people don't understand is they think that the affiliates are holding all the cards in their relationship with the network, that Sinclair and Nexstar have all the cards, but they actually don't, because they need Monday Night Football. They need other stuff from ABC if they're going to be profitable. And so when they do something as terrible as they did in this case, which is basically working hand in glove with the Trump administration to engage in what can only be called censorship, they, I think they start to recognize that, okay, they're not going to carry Kimmel right now, but that they need to be a little bit careful about their relationship with ABC or they will suffer financially.
I would just echo the point I think that we all kind of made earlier, that this, to me, as a person who is more of an observer when it comes to, this isn't my area, either entertainment or even First Amendment law, but is that there was enough of a outcry, not just from the usual voices, that it made a difference. The Joe Rogan, Ted Cruz, and some corporate people.
I will say this, to tie the two themes together, I think it was either Mimi or maybe even Harry who said mob boss when describing the president of the United States. If you haven't seen the clip of the first show back that Kimmel did on Tuesday night of Robert De Niro's impression of the chair of the FCC extorting Jimmy Kimmel on the air.
Look, it's just me, Jimmy, the chairman of the FCC, gently suggesting that you gently shut the up.
It's a pretty good watch.
It's so true. I mean, the administration is basically boring and kind of, thick-headed, and you get like Stewart and De Niro and all these guys. They are really killing them with comedy, right?
As our friend Norm Eisen talks about all the time, there's a whole history in the opposition to tyranny and authoritarianism of comedy,
yeah,
being a spectacularly successful tool in undermining the regime in a lot of ways.
Just to give you a sense of the stakes of this, so Putin in 2000 decided that he was going to take action against this group of comedians who had puppets. Their show is called Kolky. And, Boris Yeltsin, when he was in power, he didn't like the puppets. They portrayed him as a drunk. And he tried to push them a little bit, use a little bit of influence to rein them in, but ultimately tolerated them. Maybe tolerated them because he was drunk, but he tolerated them. Putin took a different course. He pushed them off the air. He hurt the networks that carried them. And then eventually, he took it from there to actually killing journalists and critics. But it's extremely important that the comedians not be silenced. And I think a really, really hopeful sign that they won't be. Trump is going to have to put up with them in one form or another until he leaves office.
I agree. I think back on the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and he was just helpless as Obama was killing him with comedy, right? All right, we're about out of time. What a week, what a week, what a week. We have just a minute left for our final feature. You probably saw the bromance statue. John has reminded us a few times this episode, the one thing that does seem to stick to Trump, Jeffrey Epstein. So we had this, happy kind of I don't know, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers statue with Trump and Epstein deposited. Was it on the national lawn, right?
I think it's on the mall.
On the mall. And the question is, 5 words or fewer, where's that statue now?
Smithsonian basement awaiting Democratic president.
That's right.
Excellent.
I would just say, not in enough places.
Oh, that's good.
Moving to Mar-a-Lago.
And I'm going with bottom of the Potomac. Thank you so much, John, Paul, and Mimi. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts. And please take a moment to rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes and my daily takes on top legal stories. Check us out as well on Substack at harrylitman.substack.com, where I'll be posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week breaking down the various threats to constitutional norms and the rule of law. And Talking Feds has joined forces with The Contrarian. I'm a founding contributor to this bold new media venture, committed to reviving the diversity of opinion that feels increasingly rare in today's news landscape, where legacy media seems to be tacking toward Trump for business reasons rather than editorial ones. Rest assured, we're still the same scrappy, independent podcast you've come to know and trust, just now linked up with an ambitious project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourse. Find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in. And don't worry, as long as you need answers, the feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Luke Cregan and Katie Upshaw. Associate producer, Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McArdle. Rosie Dawn Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahadrenathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers. And production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Sebastian Navarro. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Litman. Talk to you later.